we're now with well, hello everybody. Thank you for joining. I hope everybody is safe and sound, and also your family in these days. It's very important. I want to talk about risk and uncertainty, and the main reason for this at my company, myself, we're a multinational company and we're dealing with this crisis. And right now, everybody's concerned about business continuity, making sure things get forward and your people are protected and your supply chain is protected, and make sure you can still serve your clients. We're talking about the now. It's very hard for a lot of people to look forward and to see, okay, what's going to happen? What's the next phase? And then people rely, and you will see this a lot on what they know. In times of uncertainty, people will look for certainty, which is completely normal, and it's very. You should understand that people need this also to look forward. So hence my topic, if you're dealing with risk and uncertainty and actually what it is and what kind of methodology you can apply to make sure you can look a little bit ahead and you can plan and you can do something with that. There are the two main methodologies, intelligence and also forecasting and foresight you can use. And if you're smart with this, you can use it in the best way to the advantage of your organization. So it's not a contest of what is the best methodology, because it's not a contest as such, but it's more to use how in a smart way to use all of these methodologies to the best advantage of your organization. Right. So let me see. So as I just said, in uncertain times, people crave for certainty, and it's something of course we can't give. But still, you will see that a lot of people, but also consultants and other providers will reach out to you and say, listen, we have this model, we have that model. And if you just go on the internet and Google COVID-19 and models and forward looking, you will find thousands of models and predictions out there. And most of them is based on statistic modeling. Right? Whether you crunch it with artificial intelligence or with different tools, a lot of that is based on numbers. And only recently, I live in Belgium, our plan office just stated that, yeah, well, we expect economic decline of 8% this year, and next year it will go up with 8.6. And then my question is, on what basis can you predict this? Right, and there the answer, of course, remains a little bit flawed. So in the end, most of it is speculation, because you're in a very high level of uncertainty. So what is key in this kind of a situation? Key is that you select the right methodology for the right issue. And it starts with taking a step back, looking at the whole, trying to make sense of what's happening now, and ask yourself the right questions. What is important for my organization right now, within a year, within 15 years? What are my strategic objectives, and how am I going to navigate them through this uncertainty? What methodology am I going to use to ensure that I have less risk and maximize the opportunities that are out there? Okay, that's the main aim of this presentation. So first of all, we need to know, okay, then what is uncertainty? And there you have the difference between predictability, uncertainty, and risk. And I'd like to refer her to the famous Professor Frank Knight, where he developed this theory already in 1921, and it's still very valid. They call it the Knightian uncertainty. So in there you say, listen, you have different things. If you're talking about predictability, right? You talk about probability distribution. Basically, you have a number of data that you can use to calculate the probability distribution of things what's going to happen next, right? And that's very important to understand when you want to use certain methodologies. Next, you have uncertainty. That's when you don't know what variables will shape the future. He used the example of actually a jar, and the students had to pick out objects of it. In the first jar, he had two types of marbles with a different color, And of course, after 3 or 4 attempts, students knew, okay, the marble has or a green or a yellow color. So you have a predictability of 50%. Right? And then he had a couple of other jars. In the last jar, he put on all kinds of objects. So there was no way of telling what's going to come out. And that's more uncertainty. This is a little bit how you can compare it. Now then, what's risk? Risk is a measurable level of uncertainty. That means that as you progress in time, you will see it on the next slide, right, where you have predictability and uncertainty. Your predictability will go down, and opposite to that, your uncertainty will go up. Right? And at a certain moment, they will cross each other. So the higher predictability is, the more you can use actually those methodologies, such as insurance companies do, when they want to calculate the insurance fee you have to pay. And they use all of these kind of statistic models. How many car accidents were there in the past with this type of vehicle, etc. And they can really go to the detail of that. And the more you progress in time, more you can see new things coming up. For example, what I'm dealing with inside the threat risks, it's very fluid. And not a lot of insurance companies want to deal with that because they enter a domain where it's pretty uncertain and you don't know how things are going to develop and what the risks is and how an organization should actually protect or can protect themselves against that with a certain level of protection that's guaranteed. So there already you enter in a domain of a level of uncertainty where even risk insurance companies say, okay, oh, here, listen, here, we need to look into this and maybe I don't want to do it. Okay, and the further you progress in time, the more uncertainty we have. Now, as you see this one, this is actually more or less, let's call it a pre-COVID-19 situation, where you have a certain moment in time that we can look ahead. For example, well, it's pretty fair to say that before COVID-19, you could look ahead for a period of, let's say, 1 year, where things were assumed to stay more or less stable. After 1 year, it gets more difficult. After 5 years, the level of uncertainty is already that high that it's really hard to tell what can happen next. Right? Now, if you look at this, intelligence and forecasting, which is more or less the same methodology, right? You can use when you use historical data. As I explained with the example of an insurance company, as long as they can use historical data to a certain extent that they can quantify it, it's fine. Right? At a certain moment, the level of uncertainty becomes this high, the level of predictability this low, that they might not want to do it. And that's where strategic foresight comes in. And even strategic foresight has its limits because at a certain moment in time, it becomes speculation because the variables are this many that you can't say or have an idea of the possibilities what's going on. So you have a number of plausible futures without actually any idea how it's going to turn out. Now, with the COVID-19 situation, everything has changed, and especially the lapse of time. Where we used to be able to use intelligence and forecasting for up to a year, or maybe a little bit longer, now the situation has already, this time frame has almost evaporated to zero. Who can tell right now what kind of business or how the security situation might develop within this and 6 months? Because the situation has become so fluid. So there you see that your intelligence and forecasting will only last for a short period of time. And your strategic foresight methodology that deals with uncertainty will kick in way sooner. And you need to speed up this process if you want to be ready to take opportunities in the near future or even avoid strategic surprise. And your number of plausible future where the level of speculation really kicks in has become large. This is the basic model that I want to talk about. So if you look at this, there you see that it's very important to take a step back, think what's going on, and decide, okay, what kind of methodology should I use to help my organization move forward and navigate these uncertain times. Right, so there you have a comparison between intelligence forecasting and foresight. Now, to be quite honest, it's not a black and white story. Okay, intelligence forecasting and foresight have a lot of similarities in their methodology. There are also a number of distinctions that make the difference really clear. And therefore, I'm going to state it pretty hard, black and white, but please do note that there's a lot of overlap. So, intelligent forecasting mainly talks about variance of the same future, right? There's not a huge difference. For example, it's not peace or war, right? It's mainly within the current time frame, within the current connection, what kind of direction can we go within this bubble of the future that we see now. Foresight, on the other hand, as I look further in time, prepares yourself for different futures. Not one, but different ones. That's a main distinction that's out there. From that perspective also, then you should use intelligence and forecasting to support decision making, but in the short and the medium term, because it's hard to use it or even impossible to use it in the longer term, because that's why I use foresight. And that really supports strategic decision making because of the simple reason that if you're going to commit strategic resources, once you commit them, you can't just take them out. It's like turning a large ship. If you make an investment for in a production plant for the next 20 to 30 years, once it's in there, you can't just take it back and say, oh, we made a mistake and let's turn the ship around, because it will be there for the next 20 to 30 years. And that's one of the reasons one should really think about why you're going to put that plan in there, for what purpose, what markets are you going to serve, how the situation you think can evolve. To give you an example, the company of Shell, the oil company, they have strategic foresight since the 70s. Pierre Wack, one of the famous strategic foresight people, worked at Shell company, and they in the 70s they were one of the only ones that predicted the oil crisis, and actually they made a profit out of it. So there's a great example of how they used foresight to their advantage, because this was one of the scenarios that they anticipated. One of the other distinctions is that, as I mentioned before, intelligence and forecasting uses mainly historical data to build their model on. And basically you go data crunching, you see patterns, you see links, you see all of this kind of stuff, and that's what you actually can use. Foresight, on the other hand, mainly starts with looking at the drivers of change, and I emphasize change. What are the weak signals that are out there that will shape the future in whatever way they can, and use that mainly as a basis to start your methodology off. The weak signals that are out there, for example, it's not even a weak signal anymore, but we used to talk before about quantum technology. Once it's there, how is it going to affect the world? Who will have it? And what can that country, organization, or that person do with that? How is it going to affect all of the other environments out there? So really go for those weak signals and try to detect them and try to estimate what could be the impact on the future, and then hence on my organization and the markets. Next thing is, because of the number crunching historical data within intelligence and forecasting, it's mainly scientifically based. There are a lot of models out there that you can use depending on what domain you work, what kind of study you want to do. And basically it's a competition to get the best granularity. On the other hand, foresight, it also uses a lot of scientific models, and also uses some historical data to get some calculations done. But it's also a piece of art. You need a lot of creativity and creative minds to think about the future, about what could be happening, what could be out there in the next 20 years. How could this COVID-19 situation actually evolve in the next 2, 5 to 10 years? And what kind of futures can we see? You can't use just historical data for that and just extrapolate it into the future. Of course, that's one of the potential outcomes in the future, but there's more than that. Right. And that's why we say in intelligent forecasting, basically you take historical data, you put it in the present, see what's going on, and then you extrapolate it into the future and see what variance you can get from that, from And what you do in foresight is mainly you go and stand, basically after you've done your first part of the methodology, you go and stand in the future, and then you look back at the present and say, okay, if I have these kind of futures, how can I use it to my advantage? You can do backcasting, you can do all kinds of stuff with that. And there you draw basically your contingency plan and prepare your organization for multiple futures and not just one, right? One of the very important things, and I know it always causes a lot of discussion, even within the foresight community, it is probability rating. And please go and check out the theory of Frank Knight, the great economist who talked about risk, predictability, and uncertainty. In intelligence and forecasting, you can have probability rating. I refer back to the risk insurance companies. It's a great example how they calculate risk and insurance because they have this data that they can base it upon, right? It's mathematics. If you look at foresight, you can't put a probability rating on what the future is going to be because everything is possible. Everything is 100% and everything is 0%. Right? That's a very important distinction between intelligence and forecasting and then foresight. And that's one of also the main topics in businesses because a lot of businesses depend on statistical models for their business. And basically managers and leaders demand numbers, percentages. What's the percentage on this? What a probability rating on that? Is it likely, most likely? And even I have a military background, even there, a lot of the most requests are, okay, give me the most likely scenario, and then they will probably base their own plan on the most likely. And then you have the most dangerous and other kind of scenarios. But even as foresight originates from the military thinking in the 19th century with von Clausewitz and Moltke, even there in that domain where actually the methodology comes from or originated, even there you can see there's a high demand for this probability rating because people crave for it. They need it to have a little bit of certainty to base their own actions on. And this is one of the hard parts of foresight. You need to be able to let this go and be surprised of what the outcome of your foresight exercise is going to be. And there, as of that moment, you will see the benefits of it. And you will see things you haven't thought about before, and you will be able to prepare your organization for great opportunities that the competition will not see or will see too late, but also to prevent yourself from strategic surprises that otherwise you might not have seen coming, like this COVID-19 situation. COVID-19 as such is not a black swan because a lot of virologists already anticipated this years ago, but the effects that it will have is something else, right? Okay, last thing about it, and that's the main thing here. Intelligent forecasting covers risk to a certain extent, and also risk has a certain level of uncertainty in it, right? But it's still mathematical possible. Foresight covers uncertainty as such. You don't know what it's going to be. You can think about it, but it covers uncertainty. As I mentioned in the first thing, there's a lot of overlap and they actually go hand in hand. And if you can use both methodologies, they're mutual reinforcing. Intelligence and forecasting can provide foresight with weak signals, things that you are detecting and seeing, but you can't make sense of it right now, but you can use it in foresight to say, hey, is that a weak signal? Basically, are we seeing something that we didn't see before? Right. And foresight, if you go and anticipate the future, and you have done your foresight activity and exercise, can reinforce intelligence because you can see things from a whole different perspective. And if you learn from that, what you do in your intelligence can make more sense because now you have something to say, okay, I'm seeing this right now in my intelligence and forecasting exercise, but it might mean something else than we have thought before because we have done this foresight exercise already. So basically they go hand in hand, and you really need to make the best combination of it. Another advantage of foresight towards intelligence and forecasting is normally in foresight you also have an early warning system where you have a number of indicators to say, if I see these things happening, maybe it will point in a certain direction of the future. So if you put that in your collection efforts within your intelligent forecasting, you can put those elements in there as well. And so your intelligent forecast can also be part of your early warning system for foresight. So there are multiple advantages to combining both elements. Okay, just a quick example. We're in the COVID-19 situation. Everybody knows what it means right now, empty streets. If I take it from my perspective and my field of expertise, security, one of the things I'm saying, okay, empty streets and empty office buildings and production plants being stopped, everybody's at home. What does it mean from a security perspective? So there I can use intelligence, for example, to say, okay, if I have abandoned sites, I have to make sure that everything is secure, because maybe there's a higher probability that break-ins will occur, or that even malicious actors might abuse the status of health caretakers and other officials to get access to certain sites. Or even if you have insider threats in your organization, it could be that they have now more freedom of movement when they go to the office or when they go to the R&D sites to make sure that then they can do things they couldn't do before. So you have to think about it. There's still some level of uncertainty over there, but it's happening now, so we know more or less what we can use. Then there will be a next phase. Once that you see that the pandemic will decline and people will get back to work, or normal life is anticipated to start again, well, a lot of people, look at the States, have been put out of business. There's a lot of unemployment there. So well, what kind of effect will that generate? That's one thing. And then you will see governments trying to do something about it. And I don't have to remind you that before, especially in Europe, we were talking a lot about the Green Deal and going to a green economy. And if that is being put to the background, you might see environmental extremists going back to the forefront saying, hey, this was a policy and now you're abandoning it. What comes from that perspective? And since this is a global pandemic and it affects a global economy, and we're probably facing a global recession, how are countries and regions going to react? How about the rivalry right now between the US and China and the trade war? Is protectionism going to increase? So within this and a couple of months from here, and it's still very fluid, we don't really know what's going on. We have a level of historical data we can depend on to say, okay, we know that in times of economical crisis, your security problems will rise. That we know in general. You might see more people on the street because they're unemployed. And when security hits, countries and organizations first try to protect themselves. Okay. And in the next level, the next step, maybe within a year or a couple of years, what are we going to do? Is everybody, are countries going to unite and say, okay, we need to have a global approach on this, and we will unite and we'll work together, and actually it will bring more world peace and more stability to the world? We could go the opposite direction, and because of protectionism and a whole number of other reasons, you can see more rivalry, competition, and eventually maybe see some armed conflicts over time in certain regions. Or maybe this kind of economic recession will last for a couple of years with a lot of difficulties, or maybe there's even another future, right? So what can you use? You can use intelligent forecasting in the first part, and then strategic foresight with the overlap in the middle. Right. And I think it's important for every organization to realize that if they want to look a little bit forward and want to try to see a little bit, have a little bit of clarity in the situation and navigate this uncertainty, please use then both methodologies. Okay. Right, making the right choice. So basically what you need to do is the following. Please think for yourselves. Try, if you have the time, try to take a step back. Think of what are the key issues at stake for my organization. Try to ask yourself the right question. And it's hard. And actually, Normally you should take your time for this, but in this situation, you don't have a lot of time. So you can't go for a 100% solution here, right? But the main thing is you need to think with a couple of key people within your organization and try to be open-minded and try to avoid the trap to only rely on forecasting models that basically can't tell you much right now. And then select the right method for the right issue. Think about, what is my problem? What do I want to reach? How do I need to protect my business for the short term, for the medium term, for the long term, right? And try to select the right method for that. And then also when you've selected the right method and you don't have the expertise now, please reach out to the people who have and be very clear about what it is that you want, what your objectives are, what keeps you awake at night, basically. There are a number of key success factors if you want to do foresight. The first one is leadership. If leadership is not convinced, you can forget about it. If leadership says, no, we still want to have numbers to depend on, well, that's the way it is and you're not going to change that. But leadership, once they have strategic foresight capability, whether it be in-house or with an external expert, the relationship between the top leadership and the foresight practitioner is key. If you can't trust each other, if there's difficulties in understanding, then it won't work. You have to be really open-minded and open and very transparent towards each other and be able to speak your mind, right? Leadership is one thing, but the next thing is also culture, organizational culture. Change management is one of the toughest things to do in any organization. So even if you have a leader who's really willing to go forward with this, but you have a company culture that will obstruct or is not used to this, then you will have a tough time. There's ways to do it, and a lot of experts have great knowledge about this, so please also reach out to them. But culture within your organization is something that's really important. If your organization has a culture that they do things because they've always done it this way, then it will be very hard to implement foresight in your organization. If you have a culture where they have open-mindedness and innovative cultures where you try to look for new things and new technologies and a new way of doing things, then you have an opportunity to realize this. And last but not least, and there's other kind of key success factors, but you need basically the freedom to think and to explore. So that means that foresight practitioners should be able to inspire leaders with their new ideas. If leaders try to take over the foresight and try to steer it, you will go wrong, okay? So leadership should be involved, but at the same time, they should step back and look at it. They should enable it. They should facilitate foresight, but they should not try to control it, because then you go in the way that foresight you take the creative mind out of it, and you cannot be surprised by the results, and then the added value will be close to zero, actually. Okay. So this is the end of my presentation. Some references. A very good work on strategic foresight, very complete, I think, is Thinking Futures by Dirk Kostner and Bruno Tindemans. Please go and take a look at this. It's very complete. It has all the scientific references you need. There are a lot of great works out there, but this one stands out, I think. And also reach out to the School of International Futures. They have a great network. They're also part of the Next Generation Foresight Practitioners Awards. I'll come back to that later. But reach out to them as well. If you need foresight expertise, at least I can point you in the right direction. And they have a great creativity amongst their team. And last but not least, I am also an ambassador for the Next Generation Foresight Practitioners Award. Basically, it supports young foresight practitioners with their projects and getting them, giving them a little bit of exposure and outreach and getting their ideas also into the world. And this year there are 2 awards, a main award and a walkabout prizes. You can see the URL here below. So please visit the site and please sign up for it. And who knows, you might win it. Okay, I'll look at the queue and the questions that have been asked. Let me see the first one. Marguerite, okay. I will read it out loud. It has been said that the restorative power of ritual and routine during times of crisis can help us face loss and grief, as well as strengthen our relationships with others or reinforce our commitment to one another. What is your perspective on ritual in creating a sense of control, certainty, and predictability, especially when so much around is changing? Well, yeah, that's a good question. It's not a black and white, according to me, it's not a black and white situation. In my current work, I'm also dealing right now, most of my time goes to now. It's not looking ahead right now because there's no time for it. And you need to also ensure people that, you know, we might be in a tough situation, there's a lot of uncertainty, but also things we can do. So rituals can really help, but I think you should be able to combine both. You should have rituals, you should be able to lean back on what you know, because it also gives you strength. But at the same time, if you have this open perspective to uncertainty in the future, and you think about it, you might use your strength also to look at this future and to face uncertainty. So I know it's a kind of a philosophical answer here. I don't really have a clear answer on that, Marguerite, but it's a good question. I might have to think of it, and we might get in touch and talk about this a little more, because I think it's a good angle to take. Okay, Randy, how is an organization to best use intelligence forecast and foresight together? Well, use it together. First of all, the methodologies are to a certain extent quite similar. What you should do, if you don't have the capability in-house to use forecasting and foresight, or one of the both, a lot of organizations depend on consultants for their forecasting models. But a lot of those consultancies don't actually know how foresight is done. And what you will see, and I can see it in a lot of businesses, is that these models are used by those consultancy groups to also touch the domain of foresight. And basically say, yeah, you should use our model and we have a great relationship with you and we predict this and we predict that. But I'm going to be very honest, it's comforting bullshit, right? And it's more about selling their product, they're really helping you out. So if you don't know what to do, reach out to experts. I just mentioned a couple of them in my slides before. You can also contact me if you want to have a specific problem. I can help you to find the right person for that. Myself, I'm more an expert in the security domain, but the models go for more or less for most of the domains, economical, security, and other domains, very creative domains as well. So how to best to use it? In the short term, please use intelligence and forecasting because you already have some knowledge about that. You look into the future, you really should consider to using foresight. And reach out to the experts that have it. And there's a great community out there. I'm happy to help you forward with that. Yeah. Okay, next question, Jose. Do you think there is now an opportunity to create new world organizations? A new entity to avoid catastrophic collapse? Or is the UN good enough, or could it be relaunched? Will something new be created at the world level? Do we have leaders ready to create a better world? Wow. I wish I had a crystal ball and could answer you on that, but yeah, there's always opportunities. You know that the European Union has been under stress for quite some time, even with COVID-19. They just launched a financial plan, but not to the likes of the southern countries and not completely to the likes of the northern countries. So there already was a lot of stress. So honestly, who knows if the European Union is going to survive within the next 5 or 10 years. It's such a fluid situation, and it adds stress to already stressed organization. The relationship between the UN and China, basically, you could look at it like this. It's like you have the tectonic plates of the world, and there's also always kind of a friction and tension. But the more as this tension builds up, at a certain moment, you have an eruption. And that sometimes changes everything. And you don't know where it's going to erupt, when it's going to erupt, how hard or the eruption is going to be. But you know that something will happen. So can we create new institutions? I think so, or reinvent them maybe. But every organization will be put to the test and see if they still are valid in these times. if you look at history, look at the organizations that have survived, or the cultures or even countries that have survived for a long period of time. They're not too many. So honestly, I think with this new phase, we're at the brink of a new era with the fourth industrial revolution, with geopolitical rivalry. So I think COVID-19 has speeded up everything at a gigantic pace. So maybe in a short period of time, and what is shorter these days, in a couple of years, we can see some major changes. Who knows? Maybe we'll go back to normal. But yeah, it's certainly possible. I believe that changes are, we are facing a lot of changes, but it's hard to tell what direction is going to be. Okay, Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous. I work for a data-driven organization for leaders who have seen success in their careers by dwelling in data. I can see them struggling to understand strategic foresight cannot be data-driven. Do you have any further advice on how to guide them to embrace foresight, especially at a time like this where there's a lot of uncertainty? Yeah, well, that's one of the key questions out there. It actually depends on them. You have leaders who are not open-minded. You have not open-minded this at all. They are non-believers basically, because the problem with foresight is it's intangible. If you use foresight, there are no key performance indicators to test, okay, how successful was your methodology basically? Because it's too far out in time. The only thing that foresight offers is that you prepare yourself for different futures. And even those futures that you anticipated might not happen, because it's based on creativity. It's not based on historical data and you just extrapolate it and you have a certain percentage of probability, because you just can't tell, right? So in forecasting and intelligence, you can have key performance indicators, say, okay, did my model work or not? In foresight, you can't. So there's this big ambiguity and fog of war, and it's intangible. So regrettably, I have to say on that aspect, it's hard. But what you need to do is basically, they need to be open-minded to something. And you should have, as a foresight practitioner, or if you want to promote this, create a relationship of trust. And I can tell you, in these times of uncertainty, a lot, not to say everybody, will say, okay, these are uncertain times, but they don't know what uncertainty really means. I think by explaining already the difference between risk and uncertainty, that this is the first step. This is the reason why I didn't choose to talk about how you can do foresight as such, because the first step is you need to engage with your organization, with your leadership, to say, okay, we are in these kind of times, and this is different between risk and uncertainty. So it depends on your manager and or your leaders, and how you can talk to them, how open-minded they are. And sometimes some leaders will see light and say, okay, these uncertain times require something different than we've done before. Okay. Up till now, I think most of them will have used statistical models to penetrate markets and those kind of studies, which are great. They are great, but in uncertain times, you also need something else. Happy to help you with that before, or you're free to contact me and I can help you forward. Okay, Randy, how do we get local leaders to actively pursue foresight that builds on intelligence forecasts? Any practical first steps? Maybe an idea would be to use intelligence and forecasting and leave out the probability rating. That's the first step. Say, listen, the situation is too uncertain, too fluid to put a probability rating on it, because we just don't know. This is a new situation the world has never faced before. In a global economy, with the upcoming global recession, we don't know what the impact on the market is going to be. And that's something very tangible, and you will have probably a discussion, or you will ask for numbers anyway. But here's the thing. Again, I refer to the previous questions more or less in the same line. It's about getting the trust relationship, and you will see that businesses will fail because of this, because they are hard-headed and they will go for forecasting anyways. And in the end, they will see, oh, it didn't work. How come? Because they didn't, because foresight was never on the table. the only thing you can do is suggest it and try to put it on the table and maybe keep repeating it. And especially with your forecasting and intelligence, saying, okay, at least ask a question. Okay, if we scratch the surface, this forecasting is based on what? Historical data, but we're not in the same situation right now. You can't use that in this situation because this is a totally different world. And maybe if you plant that seed and it keeps them thinking, you say, I have an alternative, and we can combine both and use the short term, use the midterm, use the long term, maybe that will help. But it all depends on how your relationship with your leadership is. Also, Randy, please contact me later on if you can always discuss no problem. You mentioned the need for forecast prediction to inspire leaders. How have you seen this done best? Well, there's a good book. It's called Make It Stick. Everybody uses PowerPoint presentations just as I do right now. But first of all, think about what message you want to bring. Then think about how you're going to bring it. Know your leader. What is he or she? What does he or she like? Does he or she like presentations, or maybe use a video, or point something out, or just pose a problem, put the problem on the table, saying, "Listen, this is a big issue, right?" And let them think. There are a number of ways. Make It Stick is a good book. I can get you in touch with somebody who's really good at that. His name is Dennis, but I forgot the last name. He's from New Zealand, but from time to time he's in Europe. Right now with travel, probably a little less. But contact me and I'll get you in touch with somebody who's really good at that, or a number of other people who you can talk to. You can talk to him about how can you get your leader to listen to you and say, okay, listen, maybe we should use foresight. He's really creative at that. You need this creative spirits, and basically the narrative, the storytelling is just as important as doing the analysis, because you may have done the best analysis. If you can't connect your leader and bring it forward and convince them, well, you basically have done nothing, right? Then there's no effect. Okay, so reach out to me. Then, you mentioned the need for foresight to inspire leaders. Okay, I answered that question. If foresight is quite intangible, are there wider organizational benefits to the organization? Is there value in the process alone? I think there's value in the process by itself, because in whatever you do, if you talk about this, you give people ideas. You install little seeds into their head, and at least you make them think, which is always good, even if the effect is not that high at first time. Sometimes it takes quite a large period of time before people see the light, and maybe they should have hit their head to the wall first to say, okay, this didn't work. Maybe I should turn to foresight because of the idea that was given. At least try to talk about it with a lot of people and say, listen, can't we do this? Why we need to do things we always used to do it? Because it doesn't fit anymore. It doesn't work anymore. Are we going to take the risk to be put out of business because there's a lot of uncertainty and we just have to hope for the best? Or are we going to do something about it and try to anticipate the future a little bit better and try to be ready for different future, make sure our organization is resilient enough to absorb a shock and to make sure we come out of this stronger. So yeah, talk to as much people as you can and get them also passionate about strategic foresight and the benefits of it. Then, is there a best time to introduce an organization to move forward to foresight? Well, if this isn't the best time yet because the house is already burning, there is no better time. People need a crisis to change their mind, to change their way of thinking. It has always been like that, and we're just people, right? So yeah, I faced also a lot of difficulties in my previous organizations as well, even if the level of uncertainty was already pretty high, to convince leadership of the need of foresight, because they're just so dependent on what they used to do, and changing their mind, changing behavior is It's the most difficult thing to do. So, so yeah, this is, I think, one of the best times to get it out of there. But don't hope for, I would say, I'm sorry to say this, but for too much success, because people are animals of habit, and they're reluctant to change as well. But of course, maybe this kind of crisis will make them see that there's another methodology as well. Majdi, is sufficient research done on the role of institution in foresight? What are the unanswered questions in this topic? Although I don't know if I understand the question well. Is sufficient research done on the role of intuition in foresight? I don't know that. That's a very good question. I'm not quite sure what you mean by intuition and foresight. Do you mean the kind of creativity? You see things that other people might not see. You envisage things, a future that other people or most of the people do not see. Well, again, there's no black and white answer to that. It's about, who knows if it turns out like this way. Even the weirdest minds or the weirdest ideas before sometimes have turned out to be something good. The biggest innovators, for example, take the success of Apple. In the beginning, I don't think there were too many people who believed in the product of Apple. Look at what happened to Kodak. They didn't use foresight. They didn't step into the digital age, and they went bankrupt because of it. And if you see the path that Apple has already done, it's great. But also they're innovative thinkers, and they have an idea in their mind. They don't give up. So that's what you need right now. And also out of this crisis situation will come great opportunities, but we have to be able to see them. And foresight might help to discover those opportunities and to be the first to pinch in on that. So intuition is something that you, basically, I think intuition might help you to see weak signals that others don't see. So maybe that's a help, but please feel free to elaborate on this and talk a little bit more, because it's a good question. Okay, Randy, regional economies will be altered greatly. I do agree with that. Yeah, any good resources into better understanding what future scenarios could involve? Good resources. Well, if you talk about literature, the ones I mentioned is a good start because it has a good reference list of literature that's out there already. I think look at the World Economic Forum because they're also doing quite a lot of foresight research. Look at what the European Union is doing on foresight. You have ESPAS. I don't know how it's, I don't recall the abbreviation of it, ESPAS. If you go to European Union and foresight, you will certainly find some things about it. Danielle Richard, who was also on this webinar yesterday, is one of the people you could contact on that. So there's a lot of things that will need to happen because as global economy will be hit, the poorest countries or poorest regions will see the effect almost immediately, others as well. So I don't really know how it's going to turn out and what the effect is going to be, but I think you have to talk to experts right now because the books that were written in the past are coming from that era and we need to rethink things. So can't on the tip of my mind except for the ones that Futures Thinking, this one, which has a great list of other. What organizations are using foresight really well? Okay, good question. I think European Union is starting to use it well. World Economic Forum is starting to use it well. Shell has a good foresight tradition. Cho Kong is there, a really inspiring speaker. He's the head of the foresight community. I know the Suez company is doing it as well. NATO is doing this. You can reach out to Stephanie Babst for this. She used to be in the foresight for NATO. She's now retired and doing other stuff, but she can help you out on that one. From the top of mind, those are the most important ones, I think. And a lot of other companies that I don't know, or I hope they are doing foresight for them as well. So yeah. Thank you all for attending, for the great questions. Please feel free to reach out for any additional questions. I'm happy to answer them, and I'll be typing answers maybe in this one or later on to you as well. Thanks.